So Bob, this is the document I think we sent to you a week ago, and I just want to know if you had time to read it or if you want to take a few moments.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did read that.
Okay, so you're all fine and
I'm absolutely fine with it. Yes, yes, indeed. And I'll sign it if you want me to, and I'll send it to you.
I think just verbal agreement is fine.
Okay, great. You're never going to get any pushback from me.
All right. Now I got to find the spotlight. Spotlight for how's that? There we go.
There we go. Excellent.
All right.
Okay. All right. Well,
thing is still in my face here.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to say I got it right.
Yeah.
You got it.
There you go. Okay. Did you click it off?
I did. Yep. It's
okay. Gone. All right. All right. So welcome everyone to the AMTEC History Series, where we talk to the leaders and memory keepers for the Association for Media and Technology and Education in Canada, AMTEC, which began in the early 1970s. AMTEC was a driving force for the use of educational technology in the classrooms of Canada until it dissolved and partnered with the Canadian Association of Distance Education, or CADE, in 2007 to become the Canadian Network for Innovation in Education, or CNIE. This series is a part of the AMTEC History Project begun in 2021. The project was created to recognize the pioneers of educational technology in Canada and to promote the stories and past experiences of these pioneers. My name is Cindy Ives, and I'm currently Professor of Distance Education at Athabasca University. My history as an AMTEC member began in the 1980s when I worked for the National Film Board of Canada in Saskatchewan. Later, I was responsible for distance education course and program development at Laurentian University in Sudbury, and then a Ph.D. student in educational technology at Concordia University. I'm currently in my second term as past president of CNIE. And we have Chris with us today, too.
I'm Chris Crowley. I work at the University of British Columbia, and I manage the learning design team. My involvement with AMTEC goes back to the 90s. I was a Commonwealth Relations Trust bursar, and then I was involved on the board, and then I've been sort of a member at large, and now I am part of this AMTEC History Project, and this has been a lot of fun. I'm enjoying meeting all these people. And I guess I can start, Bob, and maybe talk about your background. What sector of education have you been involved with? What's your perspective in terms of
of AMTEC? I didn't get involved in AMTEC until Gary Boyd, whom Cindy knows quite well, I'm sure, or knew quite well. He's now passed away. Asked me in about 1984, 85 to be part of the team of people at Concordia that were going to sponsor one of AMTEC's meetings there. And it was, anybody that knows Gary knows that it was going to be a little bit rough and a little disorganized. And so I agreed to be rough and disorganized right along with him. And so that's where my interest and my contact with AMTEC began. I knew about it, but I've been involved with AECT for so long, since before I graduated with a PhD in 1978. Published articles there early on in their journal, and then suddenly this opportunity arose to be the editor of what had just been just evolved into CJEC. It had been, if you can believe this, Media Message before that.
And let me just interject. CJEC was the Canadian Journal of Educational Communication.
Oh, yes, indeed, right. I'll use the full name if you want me to.
No, that's good. And then we want to clarify, though, that you are a distinguished professor emeritus at Concordia University in Montreal.
Yes, that's right.
And so we missed that little piece in
sorry about that
introduction. No, that's okay. Because Concordia University has and was and still is, I think, connected to these Canadian associations in educational technology and education
Absolutely.
innovation. Yeah.
Yes,
good.
indeed. Although Concordia's EdTech program, which resides in the Department of Education and in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, has been changing quite a bit recently. And it's just because of, I suppose, just because of the change in the times and the, what's important and what's not important, and people like me are not important, so they get kicked out, and then and I'm just joking when I say that. I didn't get kicked out. I just left by my own devices. But Concordia has been had been up to that point a sort of a very heavy, heavy is not the right word, a very close associate with AMTEC and with the people in AMTEC. Not so much CJEC though. CJEC was sort of, for the longest time, was sort of an entity by itself. It almost didn't exist within AMTEC. I mean, it did. It was their journal, but it moved from Media Message, then under Dennis Alenka, who was the editor before me. It turned into a sort of magazine. And I hope I don't insult him by saying this, but he would solicit articles from various people, and that would make up an issue without review, without any consideration for the scholarly aspects of it. It was there were sort of general articles, a little like some of the more general journals that say AECT, or sorry. These names kill me. AECT, that's right, has, and AERA even has a journal, sort of a general journal, not an academic journal. And one of the things that I was asked to do, let me go back one step. At the first meeting of the board with Gary Boyd, I was asked if I would be interested in applying for the editorship of CJEC. And I said, yes, I would. And so the rest of it just sort of evolved. I was elected by the board and as the new editor, and you have some documentation of the transition of what I wrote before I became editor, and then many of the things that I wrote after that, in support of education in general, but educational technology in general, but also AMTEC and the field of educational technology in Canada. So the transition was relatively easy, except that I wanted to change it into. See, am I going into too much detail?
No, this is okay. No, because one of the things about AMTEC is it had more than one population in its membership.
Exactly.
It had academics, and like you, it had educational media technology.
Exactly. That's right.
Service providers.
And that's true of all of these organizations.
Yeah. And it had some industry. Had some industry members as well.
That's right.
So you're talking about the academic side of AMTEC, which is actually something we don't have a lot of information on. So please.
Well, maybe it was because I didn't realize that the variety of people that make up the membership of AMTEC were not all academics.
Right.
But one of the things that I thought that, and the board agreed with me at the time, one thing that I thought that we should try to do is to move towards a more academically oriented journal, like so many others, and review articles and solicit articles, not write to somebody and say, "Can you write me an article about this?" But wait and get articles from various people. Now you had to encourage people to write articles, of course, because nobody in Canada had, or at least in EdTech, had really been involved in writing academic kinds of articles, research articles, and that sort of thing, and publishing them in CJC. So that was one of the goals that I set for myself, and that the board at the time agreed to, that I would try to make it a much more academic and much more like some of the other journals that we that were in a sense competing with.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we set out to do. And the board was, at the time, was totally in favor of it. Maybe there were mostly academics on the board. I don't know. I can't remember. But we moved from Dennis Alinka, who was the editor before me, to me. And in the process, we did a whole bunch of stuff that really changed we changed, first of all, the whole format. It was a different size journal. It had a different kind of look to it from the face of it. It had many of the characteristics of a regular journal, in that it had a foreword that had a number of people listed, myself included, and also all of that stuff. And then the most important thing was that journal articles or manuscripts were reviewed. And I had a review team. I developed a review team who would agree to, and remember now, this is the post office that we're dealing with. It's not email or anything else like that. It's it was a long, drawn out process to get an article reviewed by 3 people at least and get consensus. And then if there's no consensus, we have to send it back. It was a long, arduous process, but it's the only one that he knew about.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know that all this stuff that's available to us now was coming, and we should have just sat on our hands and waited for it. Just kidding.
What
I seem to be fading. Did you notice that I'm sort of fading?
No,
That's
we're
because
good.
the light is going down here.
That may be because it's afternoon.
Yeah, well, it's late afternoon. It's
Yeah.
almost 4:30. Yeah.
I don't know. Chris, do you think
Yes.
quality's okay?
Anyway, if you can't see me, I can sit up straighter.
Okay. I think it's good, Chris.
That works.
Anyway, so one of the things that I had to do was I had to use the available funds from AEC, from AMTEC, that Dennis had received, to produce this new journal, which was going to be like three times longer per issue than anything that Dennis had ever produced.
Mm-hmm.
And Dennis had a publishing company that did his work for him, the typesetting and all that stuff. And I just couldn't see doing that. I couldn't see that how we could possibly stay within the budget and also produce this bigger and more what's the right word? Anyway, bigger journal.
Yeah.
And so we set out to find a way to produce it in Montreal, and we did find a way. PageMaker had just come out on the Macintosh, and so all of our work was done on PageMaker. Believe it or not, that was old PageMaker on a little screen like this big.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous when I think back on it. And PageMaker doesn't exist anymore, I don't think. But we managed to produce the journal that you see when you look at it, 4 years of it on this Macintosh with PageMaker, and then getting it done at McGill. We got proofs done, not proofs, but the final version printed at McGill, and then we took it and had that printed into however many members wanted it, and then we sent it out through the mail. And I actually went to the post office. I mean, to the big post office in Montreal, carrying big bags of these things that had to go to BC and to the East Coast and to all of the places that it has to go. We had to sort them into, and we had a mailing list, and we had to put the stickers on. I'm just telling you what a pain in the ass it was.
This is old technology, Bob. What
Yeah, old technology is right.
Is how far we've come.
How
today.
far we've come. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that at the time, or I would have waited.
Yeah.
No, it wouldn't have. Anyway, and the other thing was I had to develop a cadre of reviewers, people that were willing to send back manuscripts with, read the manuscripts and send them back within a timely fashion, and so that we could review them and decide who was going to be published and who wasn't. That's a tough decision, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
From my point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But we managed, and we were able to come up with a full issue for, a full year's worth of issues, for a year, until I think the last year, and then I petitioned the board to cut it down to 3 issues a year because it was just getting too expensive and too engrossing for an academic like myself, who's doing all kinds of other stuff, supposed to be writing and publishing myself, to do that, plus to handle these 4 issues a year. And so we cut it down to 3, and that made a big difference in my life. Mm-hmm. And it also cut back on the cost. It didn't cut back on the cost, but it made it possible for us to afford 3 journals very easily, whereas 4 was getting to be too expensive for the organization.
Right.
So, what else? We got a publishing grant from SSHRC, which I thought was very, very good. And it was a couple of $1,000s a year to supplement what we already had. And they still have that program, by the way.
Well, in fact, if I can interrupt, SSHRC still supports the Canadian Journal of Learning and Technology, which is what
I didn't know that.
became. Yeah.
And that was started under our, and it's just continued on? Oh,
well,
wow.
So I can't tell you whether it's been consistent, but I do know that there's a SSHRC grant for CJLT this year. And there's also a SSHRC grant for IJEDE, which is the offshoot of the old Canadian Distance Education Journal as well.
Right.
So the SSHRC grants have continued to support publication of these scholarly communication vehicles, partly because of all that incredible work that you and your colleagues did at the time you did it, right? Because this is the beginning.
You can't see me blushing, but I am.
Yeah. This is the beginning in a way, or maybe it's not the beginning, but it was a key time in university life for publisher perish, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Huge and increasing demands on academics to publish. And
it also was needed within the community of educational technologists of various in various positions. It was something that was needed beyond just a thought piece that somebody wrote off the top of their head, which is what it had sort of was beginning to be. It was actually started to be something like an academic journal. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure that it ever got there, but we tried.
Well, CJLT certainly would call itself an academic journal, and that's the grandchild, perhaps, of CJEC.
Yep.
So that's kind of a major accomplishment. And it I guess if we can take it back to AMTEC for a second, this is what AMTEC saw as a major goal. So AMTEC's vision was around sharing successful practices through research contributions of academics using technology effectively in a variety of educational contexts.
Absolutely, and that's one of the challenges that the board and I worked out to see if we could do that for AMTEC and to make it something more acceptable within the academic community, as well as, and we produced a lot of practitioner type of materials, which we also had reviewed, of course, but they still were oriented towards people who were doing practice and not so much towards doing research or interested in research activity. And if you go through the 4 years that I used, was involved in, plus Rick Schweer was the editor after me, and there have been a number of really good editors since then. And I think that what we started in 1986 or 85 or 86, whenever it was, has lasted, and did last, and is probably worth some notation.
Absolutely. So Chris, do you think Bob's getting a bit too faded out now? It's getting a bit dark. Have you got another light you could maybe
yeah, I've got one right behind me, but I don't know. Wait a minute, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna turn this light on.
Sorry for the distraction, but I'm losing.
Yeah. Well, we're mostly listening to audio anyway, so there we go.
Oh, much better. Yeah.
Oh, better.
Yeah.
Okay, that's over the fireplace.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, that's not that great.
Well,
it's not on your face, really.
I'll
try this one.
Well, maybe that's the part that we don't need to.
Oh, Bob, that's good.
Is that good?
That's pretty good.
I had this problem. I was on we had one of our very few SHIRP grants just finish up recently, and we had one of these kind of things, except with about 50 people watching, and I look like just like I do right now, which is dark.
Yeah.
And everybody else was so light, and it was
yeah.
Anyway.
Oh well.
You can edit that part out.
Yeah. So we've just kind of talked a little bit about how the journal, CJEC, which you were instrumental in adapting to a more academic context and a more, let's say, modern context,
right?
Given the major changes in educational technology that were happening in the 80s, and how AMTEC had shepherded that. You talked also about the conference that was held at Concordia somewhere in the mid-80s.
Which got me involved in all this.
The first place.
And I went, by the way, for 4 years, I went to every single conference, as well as I attended every single planning conference that the board did. And that was usually 2 or 3 a year plus the conference. Yeah. So I have been in every single province except for, what do you think? PEI.
Yeah, well, that's too bad. That was actually going to be my next question. Did you go to the conferences? What did you think about the conferences? Were they valuable to you from not just your editor perspective, but as an academic working in ed tech? Did you learn some things?
And this may be total naivete on my part, but I felt like that as CJEC became a more respectable and more noteworthy journal, that the conference presentations became better. Now, maybe that's not true, but it just seemed to me that over the 4 years that people were trying to be a little bit more research oriented, and were trying to present things that would have some impact on the practice that research is supposed to support, and that's just my opinion, and I have nothing to back it up with.
So Bob, did you Also go to AECT conferences in that time frame?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I went to all the AECT conferences up to, in fact, my earlier wife, my second wife, and I went to one in New Orleans and to AECT in New Orleans, and we were not that pleased with it because we kept, we just didn't get the sense that it had something meaningful at that point. This was back in I guess that I was still a graduate student. I was still at the University of Washington and then getting a Ph.D. And so that was about 1978. And so we both sort of slacked off. She was a professor at McGill,
right,
as it turns out. This is Cynthia Weston.
Yeah.
And we both sort of slacked off on our interest in AECT as a result of that. We just didn't think, we thought there was way too much promotion of new things. There was way too much, this is what we can do for you. If you only had some money, you can buy this, that kind of thing. Whereas I never found that to be true at AMTEC.
Right.
And I always felt that it was on target. I mean, it was on, it was looking at the things that mattered without trying to sell you stuff.
So one of the early memory keepers, you might recall, Chris, in one of our first conversations, said that educational technology developed quite differently in Canada than it did in the US.
No doubt
that in
about
the US, it was more commercial and more about the tools and the tricks. And in Canada, it was more about the effective use of the technology.
That's right. Exactly right.
In support of learning. That's your experience as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons that I didn't go back to AECT after I finished my stint. Well, actually, my stint lasted longer than my journal editorship, but I didn't go back to AECT after that. I haven't published anything in their journals. I haven't been to a single conference of theirs. And it's not because I hate them or anything. It's just because it has this air of like a fair and like with barkers and with people that are trying to sell you stuff and
yeah.
So
if I
don't buy that kind of stuff. I literally don't buy it, and I also figuratively don't buy it.
I got to say, you're a Canadian educational technologist, Bob.
I would say so too. I became one. I was not even originally an educational technologist. When I was at the University of Washington, I switched over as a result of influences there and my major professor.
Hey, Charlie.
So, hey, Lucy, this is being recorded. I'm sorry. Lucy just came home.
Okay.
As you can tell, probably. So after AECT ended, wait a minute, I've gotten confused.
No, CJEC.
After CJEC, my editorship with CJEC, I continued to go to some of the conferences, and we got a bunch of dogs in here.
That's okay.
Would you close the door, please?
Yes, I'm going to.
It's really cold here.
Yeah, it's cold here too.
Anyway, after I finished with CJEC, I continued to go to some of the meetings and presented at a couple, and then I got involved with AERA.
Oh, okay.
That's been my focus since then. I won't tell you all the details.
Yeah. So, did you know that AECT and AMTEC have a formal relationship?
I did not know.
Yeah, we're trying to untangle some of that, which is why the questions about AECT. Apparently, and in fact, it's continued, but apparently there has been a connection for many years, many years, and it has been continued through with CNIE. And it's a kind of a sharing relationship, an international relationship where the presidents of the two organizations attend each other's conferences and some other information sharing and presentations and so on. So, but you weren't a party to any of that part.
No, I was not. No, I tried to fill out the questionnaire that you sent me, and I couldn't answer a single question because I have there's nothing which, in my experience, which is a meshing of the two or interaction of the two or whatever.
Yeah.
It was always one or the other, and
okay, all right.
Maybe I was just not paying attention, but it's possible.
So, Bob, you were also a professor of distance education. Were you a member of CADE as well in those days?
First of all, I was not professor of educational. I was professor of educational technology, not of distance education.
Right.
We didn't really have at that time, we didn't have a big focus on distance education.
No, I think you taught one course.
We focused on a whole bunch of things, and distance education was one of them, and I was one of the people that did that, but we didn't have any official titles that said that.
No. Chris.
So I'm curious also, I saw in your bio that you had been a Commonwealth Relations Trust bursar. So you went to the UK for what, 3 months, 4 months?
Tell me again, what is it?
The Commonwealth Relations Trust bursar. I saw that in your bio. You went to the UK? No? Yeah. All right.
I've been to the UK many times.
Okay, maybe I misread it. Okay. All right, no worries. I
don't think that I was part of an organization in the UK and traveled there because my colleagues like going to the UK, I guess. We could get money for it.
Yeah.
For like 4 years, but that organization petered out and just disappeared.
Oh, okay. Because I went in '93, and then Gary Carlson went a bit before me. So, and I thought I had read that you had been gone too, and I'm just trying to get back to the roots of that. Okay.
Not that I remember, but there's a lot of stuff that I don't remember.
I know it's too much stuff to remember now.
Yeah. So we were at the end of my term as editor. We tried to do some special issues at the end of the term. We did one on what I guess would become interaction among people online. Back then it was like by comparison, it was like the Dark Ages. And we did a whole issue on various. It was called Cozy, and we had a whole bunch of people that were involved in Cozy. We actually did a Cozy transcript where we talked back and forth across the country. It's so ridiculous now to think about that. What are these guys doing back then? Why didn't they just use internet, or why didn't they just use voice or whatever? Well, those things didn't exist then, and Cozy was all there was really. And it was a I think it was what university was it at? Anyway, it was one of the Ontario institutions that focused on this, and that actually was the source of Cozy activity. So we had to get their permission, and we had to set it up with people across the country so that we could talk to each other. And it was outrageous by today's standards. It was, that happens. That's the way progress. I guess progress that we make progress by starting off with something. An idea of talking to people across the country, and then the first attempts are very rudimentary and very, and that's what we were then with COSI. And, look where we are now. We can talk to anybody in the world, and sometimes that's a really bad thing, not a good thing.
That's great.
Yeah. And it's not all about learning anymore.
And it's not about learning. Well, it's usually about scamming somebody.
So you had students who were experimenting with educational technologies and doing research
A lot.
in a variety of of educational technologies, and some of those students would have published in the journal.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. Stephen Shaw was one that he was my doctoral student. He and I published together in the journal, as well as several other publications. Sam Naidu, who was from, he went back to Australia. He wasn't from Australia, but he went to Australia after he graduated. And we published a number of things, both in the journal as well as outside the journal. And then there was Carol, Carol. I'm not sure that's her first name, but anyway, Carol.
Lundgren, right?
Yeah, Lundgren Carol. That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Boy, things just go away.
So there's some fairly well-known scholars.
Yeah, the people that have done a great job in their life after Concordia and after the experience with the journal and I presume with me.
Yeah, absolutely, like me.
Give myself a little credit.
There you go.
And you too?
Yeah, well, Chris, just so you know, Bob was on my committee.
Oh, that's right. Of course I was. Who was your supervisor? Rick?
Dennis.
Oh, Dennis, yeah.
Yeah. And Gary Boyd, who you mentioned as well, was also on my committee. Yeah.
And when I saw a picture of Chris, I said, that looks just like Gary. Not Gary Boyd. That looks just like Dennis Dix. I've just seen Dennis recently because I went to a 50th anniversary dinner for him.
Wow.
He and Yoshiko.
Yeah.
I'll have to meet.
Wow. Amazing. Anyway, I've got goosebumps, and that's really sort of not what we're supposed to be talking about.
I know what you mean.
Chris, bring us back on track here.
I'm going down my question list here, and I don't know. I can't really add. Bob has covered a lot of what we wanted to talk about, especially from that academic side, because I don't come from that perspective. I'm over the
yes, I know that.
So yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, believe me.
Yeah. So go ahead, Cindy.
Well, let me ask one question about that. Was there any tension or difficulty or challenge in that you're aware of in working with the sort of two sides of the EdTech coin in the Canadian context?
I never had any trouble myself.
Yeah.
We were able to publish people who were definitely practitioners and who had things they wanted to say about practice, and they didn't always have to be academically oriented. Some other journals had this. Well, actually, AECT's journal. What is that? I get all these acronyms mixed up. But anyway, their journal has two sides to it. It has a practical side and it has a research side, and we tried to maintain as much of that as we could, publishing things that people would find useful just on the face of it, and also publish things that would help us to develop and to continue to develop research within Canada. And that worked out pretty well, I would say.
Yeah.
But we always had everything, pretty much everything reviewed, and got at least one or two, and ideally three opinions other than mine about all the articles, and that was a major problem too, with just using the mail system.
Oh yeah, must have taken
as I've said before.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, I don't know that I have any other questions. Chris, did
No, I don't read. I was just trying to think of one. I mean, going forward with all your past experience, I was wondering, like, what do you think of the direction of educational technology? What are the challenges for people? I mean, all this stuff is so accessible right now, but there's sort of a good side and a bad side sometimes to this and how it's being used. What do you think in general? Do you have any
Well,
thoughts?
one of the things that my little research team, CJ, uh, uh, Center for Education, you know what I'm talking about.
CSLP?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that? Say it again.
CSLP?
CSLP, right. Why
Yeah.
can't I ever remember that? Phil, by the way, moved to Victoria. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Lives
So,
in Victoria now.
oh, really? Well, he didn't like the winter, as I
I
recall.
think. Well, no, I think his daughters are there.
Okay. Okay.
So
Chris,
rather
we're
than them
talking
coming to
about.
him, he went to them.
Okay.
Anyway,
We're talking about the Center for the Study of Learning and Performance,
that's
Chris,
right.
and that's an academic research unit within the EdTech program or the education
Well, it's
program.
within the education
Concordia.
department, and
Yeah, at
most
Concordia.
recently, it has moved with the new director, Vivek Venkatesh, because he's now in fine arts
Right.
and doing a lot of things regarding what is the word for it? Trashing other people is one way to put it.
Yeah, isn't he doing music and
It's not music. No, it's not music.
Oh.
It is about I've forgotten the term that they use for it, but it has to do with terrorism,
Oh, yeah.
with and terrorism within within the educational, or not the educational, but the university context. He's got a big team of people in a number of universities, and they all work to some extent through CSLP now. And so we are a tiny our meta-analysis group is now just a tiny little sliver of the big thing, whereas before we were we probably, well, next to the production teams and all that stuff, we were like number 2 in line. We're now like number 12 in line or something.
So changing priorities, right? And education.
It's a change. Yeah, that's right.
Changing priorities in education and in technology, and
That's right.
and changing capacity of the technologies. Changing.
One of the things that we have tried to do is to figure out what happened during the pandemic regarding online education.
Mm-hmm.
Why it was viewed as such a great thing by so many people, and such a miserable, terrible, horrible thing by so many, both teachers as well as students.
Yeah.
And what, coming out of the pandemic, what we might be able to do to make that a better experience without losing the online part.
Right.
And so what we've been looking at is the possibility that it could become some kind of hybrid of in-class instruction, blended learning, I guess is the term that's often used, as well as what is the other one that is like blended learning? Anyway,
hybrid learning, blended learning.
Yeah, well, you're getting close, but that's not
flexible.
Quite. There's another term for it. It's a very specific term that. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But you get the idea that now that students can both go to class as well as be online, why not do both those things at the same time, and plan for it and create experiences that capitalize on the two different sides. And I don't think that distance education was ever thought of in that way until blended learning came along.
Yeah. We don't tend to use the term distance education anymore. It just kind of.
No, I know. It's now either online learning.
Yes.
Or flipped classroom. That's the word I was
Oh,
using.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 We're working on
Which
a
is a
course.
form of blended learning.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it is, or distributed learning. So
Distributed learning, that's another.
our master's program at Athabasca University has been retitled. So it's a master's in open, distributed, and distance learning.
I think that's great. That encompasses a lot more than
Yes.
when you just say blended learning, or you just say, certainly flipped classroom, which is a very narrow kind of
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
orientation to blended learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my perspective on this, we call it this emergency shift during the to online during the pandemic. I think a lot of the issue is around instructional design. You know, a lot of these teachers were suddenly having to do online courses, and they didn't know how to do it. They didn't have the.
That's exactly, and that is the key right there. It's not just instructional design, because there is a lot out there about instructional design under those conditions. It's just that these teachers were not prepared, didn't know anything about it, had never done it before, and the students hadn't either. I mean, and you got two sets of people that neither one that know what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
And trying to create something out of that gives them the opportunity to move ahead and not just stay stagnant, over that whole period.
Yeah.
And it just didn't work very well, because I think it's just because of lack of maybe our lack of extending what we know into the general population of students as well as faculty members.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
But that's one way to look at it, I guess.
In our building, we have the emergency center. So if there's an earthquake or tsunami or meteor hits or something, everybody gravitates to our building because it's supposed to be proof. And they do all this planning, but we actually didn't plan around a pandemic. And how are we going to address that? We had earthquakes figured out, we got tsunamis figured out, but we didn't know how to deal with a pandemic in terms of doing
well, it's something that comes along, every 100 years. The last one was back at the during the Depression.
Yeah. So Bob, I really have one last question, and that's about what did your work with AMTEC specifically, not specifically the journal, but also anything else you might have got? Do you feel like you accomplished something different, or did you grow through your experience? Did it help? Because AMTEC is about networking.
So the question is whether it helped me and not whether it helped other people.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I never became an editor of a journal after that.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a lot of work, I'll tell you that.
Right.
And I didn't publish that much during that period. I published way more in the last 20, 25, 30 years than I've ever published during that period. But it takes a commitment to the, not only to the organization that you're helping to move, or you're trying to help to move along, but also to the general public, to the general academic public, who I think needs a place to go to look for help,
right,
and to look for something which is not just help; it's actually help based on, first of all, experience, second of all, research.
Absolutely.
That was the whole thing that I tried to accomplish, and whether I did or not is another question. But we worked our butts off to accomplish those several things.
Good.
And,
excellent.
And the journal is still, the journal continued on after they didn't go back to Dennis Alinka's form.
That's right.
They continued to run it just as we ran it, or pretty much just as we ran it. And I published several articles in it recently. I mean, not recently, but I mean after that.
Yeah. And CJLT continues. And is extremely popular with the same audiences that you just described, the people who need evidence for changing practice.
Yes, indeed. That's
Yeah.
right. And that was its whole purpose right there in a nutshell.
So we've got a nice continuum here, the development over
Yes.
time. That's excellent. Good. I think, are we finished, Chris?
I think so.
Okay,
It was
good.
wonderful.
Well,
I
let me
can't
say
think of
thanks,
anything
Bob.
else I would ask myself.
Okay. If there's anything, you can always let us.
I can let you know.
I
Yeah.
want to thank you, Bob, for joining us and sharing your stories.
My great pleasure.
And to those of you who might be watching this, we want to thank you for joining us along this video journey and invite you to join us another time for another interesting conversation on the history of educational technology in Canada. Thanks very much, Bob. And
My
so
pleasure.
Chris, you can
Bob.
turn that.
I would say any time, but I'm not sure how much longer I have to.